Coming up today, the Islamic State militant group claims responsibility for the terrorist attacks in Brussels that killed more than 30 people and wounded about 230 others. Belgium remains on its highest state of alert. With exactly 3 weeks remaining before the general election, Korea's political parties have until the end of the day to finalize their candidates. A dark cloud hangs over the main opposition party due to infighting. First, North Korea threatens violence against President Park Geun-hye. Pyongyang is angry about tough new UN sanctions and the ongoing joint military drills between Seoul and Washington. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Wednesday, the 23rd of March. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Brim. We start with the latest on the deadly terror attacks in Brussels, and the militant group that calls itself Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the blast that killed more than 30 people and wounded more than 200 others. Belgian police and European security forces are hunting a suspect who is believed to have fled the scene. Park Jung-hong has the details.
Belgium seems to have been the victim of twisted retribution. In a message written in Arabic and French, a website affiliated with ISIS claimed that its, quote, fighters carried out the bombings against the Belgian capital of Brussels, a country participating in the international coalition against the Islamic State. The statement went on to say that the attacks were merely the beginning and the consequences would be devastating. Sources quoted by Reuters say the perpetrators seem to be connected to the recently captured Saleh Abdeslam, the prime suspect in the deadly Paris attacks last November. In the wake of the Brussels attacks, Belgian federal police are searching for a man who they believe is a suspect. Caught on surveillance camera, the man was wearing a light-colored jacket with a hat pulled down over his face, while two other men were dressed in dark clothes. Belgian police believe the two were the suicide bombers and the third man an accomplice who fled the scene. The images were taken from inside the airport minutes before the deadly blasts and made public. At around 8 a.m. on Tuesday, two bombs went off in the departure hall at the Zaventem airport, and just over an hour later, a third bombing struck a subway station near the EU headquarters. In a rare joint statement, heads of the 28-nation European Union condemned the attacks and pledged to fight terrorism with, quote, all necessary means. Setting aside their differences over the Syrian refugee issue, the leaders pledged to be united in the fight against hatred, violent extremism, and terrorism. Officials in Belgium have declared 3 days of national mourning. Park Jung-hong, Arirang News.
Now, as 3 blasts hit the airport and a metro station in Brussels, it was a day of horror for the unsuspecting victims. For more on how the events unfolded, O.C. Young reports.
It was 8 a.m. on an average weekday at the Brussels Zaventem airport. There was a blinding flash, and then chaos ensued. Tiles fell from the ceiling as it collapsed and smashed onto the floor. Windows were shattered, sending shards of glass flying.
Of course, I hear the explosion, and the explosion is quite bad. The mirror flying, and people injured there with a bleeding scalp, with everything, and bleeding in the nose. I think many things happened there.
Blood trickling down their heads, travellers ran for their lives from the building that was now filled with dust and smoke.
A lot of people with blood, and I just run out of the airport. Yeah, and all the building there is like. It's like a chaos there.
It was too late for the 14 found dead among the broken tiles and debris. Around 100 were left injured from the 2 explosions, 1 bomb containing nails. But the day of terror had only just begun. 79 minutes later, another blast hit unsuspecting commuters at Malbec metro station, close to European Union institutions. Passengers evacuated the station, emerging from the black smoke and clouds of dust. At least 20 were killed in the rush hour attack and 130 wounded. Following the wave of attacks, the country's terror threat level has been raised to the maximum of 4, and 255 troops have been dispatched to the capital. The Brussels airport will be closed through Wednesday. Countries in the EU and around the world have temporarily diverted flights and trains away from Belgium, in addition to tightening security on the borders. Amid rising fears of near-term attacks on other European countries, the United States has warned its citizens about the potential risks of travelling to the continent as a whole. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now, in other news, with just 3 weeks to go before Korea heads to the polls for a general election, the country's political parties are racing to wrap up a chaotic nomination process before candidate registration begins on Thursday. Our Shin Se-min with this report.
Will the leader of Korea's largest opposition party stay on or resign? That's the big political question on Wednesday as the clock ticks down for the April 13th general election, now just 3 weeks away. Kim Jong-un, the interim chief of the Minju Party of Korea, is reportedly considering his position. Following speculation, he put himself on the list of candidates for proportional representative seats, giving himself a much better chance of retaining a seat in the National Assembly. Many in the party, including its former chair Moon Jae-in, have been trying to dissuade Kim from resigning. Kim, who has stayed away from party affairs since Monday, will speak to reporters on Wednesday afternoon, where he's expected to announce his decision. The main opposition party's ongoing candidate nomination troubles have resulted in a number of defections, but the ruling Saenuri Party has seen more leave. A key member of the pro-President Park Geun-hye faction, Yoon Sang-hyun, says he'll run as an independent after being eliminated from the ruling party's nomination process. In a leaked phone call, the president's former special political advisor was heard using a profanity while criticizing party chair Kim Moo-sung. In the meantime, ruling camp's nomination committee have postponed announcing whether they will put the party's former floor leader, Yoo Sung-min, forward or not. If the board continues to delay Yoo's nomination, it'll give him no time to announce an independent run and leave him with no option but to leave the party. With the nomination process coming to a close, all finalized candidates will begin registering on Thursday. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The Korean government has laid out its plans for preventing the spread of the Zika virus after the country confirmed its first case this week. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Korean government officials and representatives from the ruling Saenuri Party met at the National Assembly on Wednesday to discuss preventative measures against the Zika virus outbreak. At a briefing after the meeting attended by Health Minister Chung Jin-yeop and the director of the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Chung Ki-seo, the group announced plans to increase the number of inspection and quarantine units in the country. They also plan to put a system in place by the end of the year that would enable authorities to track locals who visited an affected country using the mobile roaming service. This will also enable authorities to keep track of people who visit an affected country and come back to Korea through a third country. On Tuesday, Korea confirmed its first Zika case in a 43-year-old man who showed symptoms of infection after coming back from a 22-day business trip to Brazil. The KCD says, however, that the man has recovered and will be discharged from the hospital soon. It also says that a secondary infection from the man is highly unlikely. The KCDC director reiterated that the Zika virus is not airborne and cannot be transmitted through physical contact with an infected person. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, in economic news, Korea is stepping up its efforts to support exporters, which are contending with over a year of sluggish outbound shipments now. The Trade Ministry said on Wednesday that it's launching a service to help businesses before they apply for government support. Officials from trade agencies and financial institutions will visit the nation's 4 major industrial complexes starting today to meet with employees and explain the plan. The ministry also says it will create an export revitalization scheme for each complex with the goal of boosting the exports of small and medium-sized enterprises by about 10% this year. North Korea claims to be plotting revenge against President Park Geun-hye and her supporters in the south. The latest threat out of Pyongyang is deemed to be in protest of the tough UN sanctions and the ongoing South Korea-US military drills that might be a little too close to the regime's comfort. Our Connie Kim with the report.
A retaliatory war to eliminate President Park Geun-hye's supporters was a message on Wednesday from North Korea's Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of Korea. The committee's message was in protest of a South Korean Air Force drill this week that simulated an attack on a key North Korean facility. Ratcheting up the rhetoric against the South, the committee said the warfare could start inside or close to the presidential office of Cheongwade. It added its multiple rocket launchers are ready to target the Blue House at any moment. Seoul's Unification Ministry warned North Korea against making terror threats and called on Pyongyang to stop such behavior. It also continued to urge the regime to give up its nuclear weapons program. North Korea usually makes verbal threats during the annual South Korea-U.S. military exercises, but the severity of this year's reaction is raising tension on the peninsula to new heights. North Korea has launched 9 short and mid-range missiles since the joint drills kicked off at the beginning of the month. During this period, the North also claimed to have successfully miniaturized a nuclear warhead to fit on ballistic missiles and proclaimed that it'll carry out more nuclear and ballistic missile tests soon. In another move, online news site Washington Free Beacon reports that North Korea conducted a ground test of its new KN-11 submarine-launched ballistic missile at the Sinpo shipyard located on the country's east coast. The ejection test conducted on March 16th is the latest since North Korea said it successfully tested a SLBM in December. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter has revealed that South Korea and the United States have agreed to deploy the U.S. anti-ballistic missile system known as THAAD to the Korean Peninsula. Speaking at a House Armed Services Committee hearing on Tuesday, Carter said the system would protect South Korea and the U.S. troop presence here against North Korea's missile threats. The U.S. Defense Chief added that Washington has started to boost its capabilities in light of North Korea possibly having the capacity to range the U.S. with an intercontinental ballistic missile. Washington also hopes to talk with China and address its concerns about the possible deployment. Rose Gottemiller, Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security, stressed that the U.S. and South Korea had just begun discussions and no decision has been made. She added that THAAD is only capable of defending the territory on which it's deployed and is not capable of the kind of reach China thinks it has. U.S. President Barack Obama has wrapped up his historic visit to Cuba. During his 3-day stay, he met his Cuban counterpart, gave a speech to the Cuban people, and even took in a baseball game. Park Ji-won has more.
The first sitting U.S. president to visit Cuba in 88 years made up for lost time, packing in a lot during his stay on the island. President Obama's last hours in Cuba were spent watching a baseball game, a sport with which both countries share a common passion. Obama sat with Cuban President Raul Castro for the game between the Tampa Bay Rays and the Cuban national team. Cuban citizens found it hard to contain their excitement about the visit.
This has a special meaning for us with regards to Cuban-U.S. relations. It is very important for us.
Earlier in the day, Obama made the first ever live broadcast speech to the Cuban people at Havana's Grand Theater. He said by renewing relations with Cuba, he hopes to bury the last remnant of the Cold War.
Why now? There is one simple answer. What the United States was doing was not working. We have to have the courage to acknowledge that truth. A policy of isolation designed for the Cold War made little sense in the 21st century.
Despite their economic and political differences, Obama stressed the common heritage between the countries and said they will soon begin cooperation in various fields such as agriculture, education, and law enforcement. Obama also stressed the value of democracy and human rights and reconciliation.
I believe that every person should have the freedom to practice their faith peacefully and publicly. And yes, I believe voters should be able to choose their governments in free and democratic elections.
Obama held a private meeting with Cuban dissidents and civil society leaders, including independent journalists and a gay rights advocate, at the U.S. Embassy on the same day. In December last year, Obama and Raul Castro announced the historic ending of their 56-year-old estrangement since Cuba's 1959 revolution. President Obama is now in Argentina for summit talks with the South American country's new president, Mauricio Macri. 박지원, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Wednesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for tuning in, and we'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Until then, goodbye.